Good evening. We are delighted to welcome you this evening to Scarrett Bennett Center as we celebrate our 25th anniversary as a nonprofit education, conference, and retreat center. Here we are committed to addressing social justice issues that promote cross-cultural understanding, education on women's issues, and spiritual renewal. This is a beautiful campus, and even though the sun's not out right now, it truly is a marvelous campus. Some have called it a sacred place, especially if you've walked the labyrinth. Others come for the many programs we offer, or a meeting place for others to dialogue about important issues of the day. And I'm sure you've known a person or two who've come here to tie the knot. Now, one of the things I will say, that we're not responsible if they decide to get divorced. But for whatever reason, you've chosen to be here. We're glad that you're here at Scarrett Bennett, which is an important part of the Nashville landscape. We have such a rich history as a legacy institution for Scarrett Bible and Training School and later Scarrett College, and that we are affiliated with the United Methodist Women. Founded in 1892, Scarrett College was a place where women were educated to understand cultural difference and spiritual formation that prepared them for overseas missionary work. Scarrett continued over the decades, and after the closing of the college in 1988, the campus was transformed into what you now know as Scarrett Bennett Center, where we continue today to provide educational opportunities and warm hospitality. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Carpenter Program in Religion, Gender, and Sexuality at Vanderbilt University for their support towards the filming of this dialogue. We greatly appreciate their generosity in ensuring the success of what will be a wonderful evening. And I have very much especially been looking forward to tonight with great anticipation. When worlds collide, two Jersey broads on life, love, and the Holy Spirit. And if you haven't been with us for the past 24 hours, then you've really missed something that's been breathtaking and magical in terms of the music performed by Janis last night. And today, we had a quantum experience from Miriam Therese Winter. My spirit, I think it's my soul, truly feels enriched and uplifted. And I believe that I can say on behalf of all those folks who were here, we say thank you very much for the music and the words. Tonight's moderator is John Seigenthaler, Sr., who founded the First Amendment Center in 1991 with the mission of creating national discussion, dialogue, and debate about First Amendment rights and values. And this stems from a multitude of experiences in his illustrious career in journalism, politics, and publishing. A former president of the American Society of Newspaper Editors, Seigenthaler served for 43 years as an award-winning journalist for the Tennessean. At his retirement, he was editor, publisher, and CEO. In 1982, Seigenthaler became founding editorial director of USA Today and served in that position for a decade, retiring with both the Nashville and Nashville newspapers in 1991. Seigenthaler left journalism briefly in the early 1960s to serve in the U.S. Justice Department and administrative assistant to Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. His work in the field of civil rights led to his service as chief negotiator with the governor of Alabama during the Freedom Rides. During that crisis, while attempting to aid freedom riders in Montgomery, Alabama, he was attacked by a mob of Klansmen and hospitalized. In 2002, the trustees of Vanderbilt University created the John Seigenthaler Center, naming the building in Nashville that houses the Office of Freedom Forum, the First Amendment Center, and the Diversity Institute. And now, John tonight is hanging out with two Jersey broads.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. The two of you don't need an introduction then, but I'm truly honored to be back again with my friend of long-standing, Janis, and my more recent telephone friend, Miriam Therese Winter. We are going to have a discussion among ourselves, and then we're going to ask you to join in the discussion after a bit. I have a 15-year-old grandson, And really the third John Seigenthaler, but we call him Jack for identification purposes. And about 3-4 nights a week, he calls to check on my conduct. And he called before we came tonight and said he knew I was going to be with Janis and MT. And Jack said, "Grand." That's what he calls me, Grand. Dolores thinks she should be called Grander, but he has another name for her. "Grand, what's the first thing you're going to say when you're there tonight with those two stars?" I said, "Jack, obviously the first thing I'm going to say is how happy I am to be with Janis and MT. How happy I am to be with them." And Jack said, "Grand, you're 85 years old. You're happy to be anywhere." And you know, he's right, but I just tell the two of you, I'm so happy to be with you. And I thank you, Janis, for thinking of me and letting me have this role to share this evening. Now,
oh my gosh, I was ready to beg. It was a great moment. I said, "John, I would like a favor," and he said, "Yes." And I said, "Do you not want to know what the favor is?" And he said, "No, it's fine, whatever it is."
It was almost that way, but but you know, I listened to that concert last night, and it just moved me. I began with an assumption that may be false. I assume that it was music. I assume it was music, a mutual love of it, kinship as writers of it, shared experience as performers of it, that brought together this Catholic medical mission nun with this Jewish lesbian. And so here they are with me, and Janis is in a minority. I was raised, as they know, as a Roman Catholic. And as I said last night, make my Easter duty. And but if I'm right about that it was music that brought you together, if I could, I'd like to ask each of you to explain it from your own perspective. What is it about music that serves as a magnet between two people who come from different cultural backgrounds, except for being, as you all said, two broads from New Jersey? What is it about this magical magnet that pulls the two of you together and makes the rest of us so lucky to be sitting here to have you talk about your careers, your lives, your talent? What is it? Janis?
Well, for me, I first knew MT's work because of an article she wrote in the 60s or 70s, called Women Church, that was fairly inflammatory at the time, and I was in my late teens, early 20s, and anything inflammatory was interesting to me. In fact, I was working on a song with another songwriter, and I had pulled the article offline and said, "This is what this song needs to be about." And that was before we even spoke. Music is, of all the art forms, it's the only invisible one. It's the only one that sneaks in without your doing anything participatory. You don't have to go somewhere to see it. You don't have to touch it. You can just be sitting somewhere, and there it is, entering your soul, entering your heart, entering through your ears and the pores of your skin. Most of the musicians I know are big believers in quantum physics, in everything's interconnectedness, because we know the sense of wood against our skins coming then through our throats and through our hands and into the air. And I think that any musical person, be they a performer of music or not, who cherishes that invisibility and the spirituality of the divine through the invisible, if I don't sound too pretentious, connects with any other musical person And then on a spiritual level, rather than a religious level, because we are all agreed that those are two very different things, on a spiritual level, the fact that MT had always been what I would term a person of integrity. What wasn't mentioned about USA Today was that when they asked John to be there, it was because he had an unimpeachable integrity, and they needed someone who would restore the reputation of the journalists that were working there and the journalists in general. And they chose John because you could not fault his integrity. As an artist, rather than a musician or a slot, just like as a medical mission sister rather than as a nun, as a Catholic, as a whatever box we put it into, as an artist, I'm interested in people who are interested in the wider world, the world beyond race, beyond color, beyond nationality, beyond culture. I'm interested in breaking those barriers or going through them. So I wind up working with like-minded people, and that's when we got along.
Awesome.
Thank you.
We first actually physically met over laundry. She now is spoken as the theologian philosopher. I'm going to speak pragmatically. We got connected through a third party who was looking to have a project of finding persons of note, iconic persons in the field of music, to sing some of the songs I had written to show that it isn't just a Catholic thing, that music has the capacity to transcend culture, religion, time, and instead of locking folk-style songs of the 60s into folk mass realities only and then say that's passé, you know, the genre has moved on and out and into the universe. He was trying to put it out there, and she was contacted, and Janis graciously agreed to participate. To make a long story short, she was on tour, and she happened to tour through Hartford. And I said, let's get together. She says, I need to do some laundry. I said, I own a washing machine. And I want to tell you this. My thrill at meeting this truly icon of American culture and talent, and having her in my home, I can't find the words really to express how powerful that was. And she comes in dragging a suitcase the size of herself.
Filled with the laundry of 4 or 5 weeks on tour.
Big laundry, and she goes down and we throw everything in the washing machine, and for the 3 hours it took from start to finish, we're talking theology and philosophy. She starts in, I want to ask her all about the music field and all this Nashville, and this is my moment to get caught up in the real world because I am so out of it. And so dated, and she goes on about this, that, and the other thing, and she runs to my computer and she says, what book was that? And she types Amazon and she orders it, and something else, and she orders another one, and I said, who is this woman?
And then we got into quantum physics.
Oh, immediately.
3 hours of 2 women bonding over laundry and quantum physics. It was amazing.
Amazing, you know?
It was amazing.
Before the wash was dry.
We were fast friends.
Fast friends, yeah, really and truly, forever. And I know that is a gift that women hold, but particularly when you're open, literally, to the spirit of the universe, to the times in which we live. And you know that the songs you sing, you write and sing, are not for a class of persons and not limited to a genre, but they are for all people. And then when that song, going back to your question, enters your soul, you hear it not through your ears, but your whole body absorbs it. Like last night, that group of diverse individuals who had never met before were one in the talented performance of the wonderful people that had joined the women. Several of them, almost all of them, are here tonight. They are all here tonight.
They are all here tonight.
Yes, all here tonight with Janis. It shows the possibilities we have for becoming one in this very complicated world in which we live.
Also, I don't know about you, but we both grew up in Jersey.
Yes.
And the neighborhoods that I grew up in, we moved a lot because the FBI had my father under surveillance, and he was a teacher, so he could never get tenure anywhere. So we had to move every 2 years.
So what period is this?
This is 1950s to the
right
early
in the middle
60s.
of McCarthy era.
In the middle of McCarthy, going right into the civil rights era. So I was born in 51, and my father was a farmer, and then he got his degree from Rutgers in 58, I believe. But we were under surveillance because my father, as a chicken farmer, had the gall to go to a meeting about the price of eggs. And that was enough. So we moved every 2 years, and in a sense, as an artist, that was great for me because although I never got to put down roots, I also learned that the universe is so much bigger than your neighborhood. And that there were all kinds of different people. And I think that was one of the great things about Jersey, even for you, coming from a slightly different place, was that it was so very diverse. You couldn't live in the same neighborhood economically or racially because we were all so stuck together. There's no room, that everybody was on top of everybody.
And I grew up in Passaic, New Jersey, lived in a cold water flat over my grandfather's saloon. And my exposure to music was hearing after hours, late in the night, people singing downstairs when they had had a little too much. And
Well, that's where it came from.
that's where it came from. But I also, what was cultivated within me was not so much music in terms of performative. I played a little bit of piano, but very orderly piano lessons from Sister Claveria, you can imagine. But the cultivation of, or the experience of the music in the metaphor and in the poetic word, to me, everything sang. There was music everywhere, not only in the birds and the crickets, but in the wind and the rain. And even though it was in this place around the saloon, and there was the Dundee Canal, and there was the junkyard, and there was the woolen mill, and it was all like ugly. My grandmother had this wee little garden beside the saloon, a little patch of grass. And I had permission to sit there after school every day. And I would sit there with a little pad of paper, and I would imagine these poems. And so my heart and spirit just soared, beyond the place I was in. And that's why through the years, somehow there was music and rhythm within the word that eventually found the tunes coming out of the words later on when I got into the music.
And that's
reality.
that's the astonishing thing to me about music, is that it requires nothing but a human being.
Yeah.
It only requires a pair of hands, a voice, the ability to hear a sound, and you have music, whether it's birds or whether it's the sound of high heels clicking on the pavement. There's so much music in the world around us that just imbues us, and it doesn't have to be formalized, and it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, the older I get as a musician and an artist, the more I realize that perfection is just such a limited thing to seek after. The more I realize that there's so much value to live music, because if you make a mistake, who cares? You're working at it and you're trying. And that's the cool part, not the perfect part. So when people like us grow up, little girls who are born not to fit into that mold, who are born not to be married in the traditional sense and dream all their lives of a wedding and what our dresses will look like, which is such a completely alien concept to me personally. When we grow up, we're growing up with an awareness that we are at once set apart and yet so interconnected with everything. And I think it makes us a little crazy at certain points in our lives.
Little.
A little.
Don't know about you, girl.
Let me ask about another aspect of a talent you share. Last night we sort of got a wonderful taste of what it is to be a performer. That as MT and I sat there and listened to you all perform, it's a great gift. I mean, that talent is a great gift.
No doubt.
But there is another talent that the two of you share, and that is the writing the writing of music, and it seems to me particularly of particular interest to many people is what goes into writing these lyrics. And we talked last night about Can't See You Anymore, Baby. I mean, you were alerted, you were warned. I think your father said to you, there's going to be trouble.
My father listened to my first record, looked at me and said, there is going to be a lot of trouble over this.
And there was a lot of
right.
trouble.
I laughed at him. To my shame, I just thought he was being an old fuddy-duddy. But he was absolutely right.
In the writing of it, I know I've done some writing, but I'd have to say most often I was writing for myself. You know, I knew there were readers out there, and I wanted them to read what I put down. But you know, you don't particularly have to worry about that sort of hostile response, or about any sort. How much of writing music has to do with thinking about the audience, contemplating what the audience wants to hear, giving the audience what it wants to hear, and how much of it has to do with just writing this song for myself? It's what I want to say, and I just can't worry about whether it's going to hit the charts. What I'm really worried about is whether it touches the spirit. How much, talk a little about this writing process and the audience that's out there on the other side of the stage or the television screen or in the concert hall.
I don't know what it's like when you write the kind of music MT writes, because her music is sung all over the world in a completely different setting than my music is sung. For me, I try to reach a universal, but I'm also very conscious that my end goal is not to have the audience hear it. My end goal is to beat my best song, and always has been. I think I was lucky to come up in an era where having a hit record was considered almost embarrassing as a folk singer, because that pressure was off. The pressure was to write about things that were relevant, that were universal, that moved the world forward in a better way. And then there came a point where I realized that even that pressure was interfering with my writing, and the only thing that I've ever really protected assiduously throughout my life was my writing, for whatever reason. I don't know why. So when I sit down to write, my primary concern as a writer is, am I writing the best that I can write? Am I settling? To try not to settle. I mean, at 62, it's a lot harder to keep my edge than it was at 22, when I thought I was fabulous all the time. You know, and now at 62, I know that if I'm fabulous occasionally, then I've really done my job. The other aspect of it is the audience, and in that sense, I write for an American audience. I write from an American viewpoint. I've never been anywhere that I've lived for any period of time but America. But I'm also conscious that my music is listened to in Japan and in Europe. And there are moments in my writing where I will have the choice of using a loaded word like democracy that is so differently interpreted depending on the country, or using another word that is less liable to be misinterpreted. Using a loaded word like God, which is going to be completely interpreted differently depending on the listener. When I do master classes, I talk about the danger of using loaded words that are filled with imagery, like flag has so much imagery connected to it, and you drag all that imagery with you when you use that word in a song, so you have to be careful of that. But beyond any carefulness, beyond any intellectual looking at it, as a writer, I believe, if you are born with talent, there is a knowingness in you, and you know when it's right. So if I'm, for instance, co-writing, When I was working on our piece, MT had a spoken word piece that she gave me permission to set to music. I knew when it was right. And I knew when I was down the wrong path. And that's the part that you can't explain. That's the part that just comes with the package of having talent. The part that when there are two writers in a room, they look at each other and they both go, that's it. Or they look at each other and go, nah. Everybody in the room knows. And that's the talent, and that's the part you can't teach. Or cultivate, for that matter. It just is. I don't know, is it different for you?
No, and well, different, but what you just said, the same. My writing began as poetry at the age of 6 or 7, I forget exactly which, very young, and it was intensely internal, personal. It was like a world. It was a place I could go and be and say and think what I wanted metaphorically, not literally. And I knew the meaning of it, and it meant a lot to me, whatever it meant. And that evolved, and so it was like secret poetry, this secret world where everything was just beautiful and deeply spirited.
Sacred.
Sacred, thank you, excellent. When I began first writing music, there was a utilitarian dimension to it. Those of you who are of the Roman Catholic tradition, either present or past, know that way back in the 1960s, which I remember like yesterday, when there was that transition from centuries of Latin language and music that was incredibly attuned to the language. The Gregorian chant was genius music. The marriage of the word and the melody, the accent, the word accent, so the Latin language and the music, it was beautifully, and I mastered that. I loved the Gregorian chant. But when that all ended, overnight, midnight, I'll never forget, you couldn't sing English one day before, but at midnight the next day, you couldn't sing Latin anymore. And there we were. What are you going to sing? When you have like high mass or music for mass. And with the tradition, the music on Sunday liturgies, masses, as you know, matched the text of the gospel. So there were either stories or messages. So like, for example, the wedding banquet, send out, and everybody said, I cannot come because of this. Well, talk about hostility. You don't quite expect it in the church, but let me tell you, I don't know, I just picked up this guitar and I started singing, I'm in charge of the liturgy and we need a song. And so I thought, I cannot come to the banquet, don't trouble me now. I have married a wife, I have bought me a cow. That's not going to go over too well, singing that with not only with the guitar, boom, 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 and then drums, boom, 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 because it was a drum beat. Whoa, how to get in trouble in a red hot hurry.
When you're
and being liturgically accurate.
well, that's where I wanted to go with you.
There you go.
I mean, Janis,
I was banned in
she
Scranton.
doesn't have to worry about the establishment
No.
of Judaism when she writes.
It's fabulous to be Jewish because it just leaves you wide open to whatever. Yeah.
Especially being lesbian, right?
Yes, but also we don't have hell. We don't have a
that's
hell.
lovely.
We don't have that punishment.
But
So
the two of you, each in her own way, for example, has sort of crossed frontiers. Maybe that's an overused cliche, but both of you are interested in the feminist movement.
Oh, yeah.
I would have to say our church is not particularly
You
interested
noticed, yes.
in the feminist movement. And having said that, I want to ask you if you wrote these words.
Uh-oh.
I mean, I read something online, Wellspring of Wisdom, and I read a stanza on the moon and the stars, and one on the sun, one on the wind, and one on the birds, and one on the fish, and one on the animals. And then I came to one called Woman. And it went like this. In the beginning, she created her. She bore her, and she loved her, and she shared with her her primal power. Did you write that?
Well, Spirit wrote it through me.
I mean, I can.
She helped.
I mean,
a lot.
I can feel the Roman curia quaking
Whoa.
when those words are read. And did you think about? Did you think about where you were coming from?
You don't think about that. You can't think. You can't have a filter of, oh my God.
You can't have a filter.
You can't have a filter
Can't have a
because you
filter,
can't
right.
create.
Can't have a filter.
You don't go there. You just don't do anything.
You know, there are a group of them that are reminding Francis about people like you right now.
I know at this moment, right, as we speak. And now this is going to be like on film? Well, am I crazy or what?
But
Why
that's
am I
the best
here?
thing about art.
Yes.
Art is seditious. By its very nature, it's seditious.
Ah, that's it.
Because you can't have a filter. Once you put a filter in place before it, it stops becoming art and it becomes co-opted.
There was a time, at that period, when the various denominations were putting out new hymnals, okay? And they knew they needed something for the women. So they got about a dozen of us, and we were kind of commissioned to write something. And I had Mother in God, which I thought was already written and perfectly. Mother in God, to whom we sing, wide is your womb, warm is your wing, and about the breath. And there was horror in the committee that reviewed it in this one denomination I will not mention. And they said, what are we going to do? There are children at the children at the liturgy. What are they going to think when they hear the word breasts? And one of the women on the committee said, dinner. They rejected the piece, so I had to write a safe one called Wellspring of Wisdom that had not female, but metaphors that were more inclusive, but you couldn't do anything specifically female because it just was too evocative.
What about then, just to go back for a moment to last night, what about this whole idea music has the power to change attitudes, to change minds, to change hearts, to bring us from where we were, as I said last night, can't see you anymore, baby, helped a lot of people, maybe me too. You know, somebody else said, we got a long way to go, baby. But we still got a long way to go in a lot of different directions. And what about the power of music
Well, I think
to move minds and attitudes and hearts?
if you look at the civil rights movement and a song like We Shall Overcome, that united so many people because it gave them something to cling to and a reason to lock arms and something to sing against the dark forces. Music does that. Music empowers, it ennobles. And again, that's why it's so seditious, because you didn't require anything in the civil rights movement but voices to stand there and to sing, we shall overcome, in the face of the water hoses, in the face of the dogs, in the face of the guns, in the face of Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney, to have a mass of people singing, we shall overcome, with that musicality in it. It's like speaking to God, and it's like speaking as God. And once that is moving through you and you get a mass of people, it begins to become a pyramid like this, and it builds up just like quantum physics builds up, and it builds up and up and up and becomes a vortex. And the energy that it creates, I think, then goes out into the universe, if you want to put it that way, and changes hearts. I mean, music, again using the analogy of civil rights, we had to have the laws change. We had to have the laws change so that they would be implemented. But we needed the music of it behind it to change the hearts. Because music can get in there and change a heart way before a law is going to have any effect on it. And you've got to have both to really affect change. That's my take anyway.
And all these significant liberation movements around the world, if you examine them, you'll see that at the heart of the turning point came with music. South Africa, for example, apartheid. What really tipped the balance was when you looked at 4 million black people toying, dancing up the streets, singing freedom songs. all of a sudden you're going to relinquish your stranglehold on power because it's terrifying. And that's why within Christianity, and particularly I would say within the Roman Catholic Church, there was such a stranglehold on the music, laws that protected it. You didn't want the people to sing a song. You wanted to sing them to sing something that was like sacred or different, because you can't control music. It comes out of a different part. It's out of the emotions, out of it's a power that once unleashed unites and has a life of its own.
And anybody can do it.
And anybody can do it.
Anybody can do it, and that's what makes it so frightening to the powers that be.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
No, that's it. And people don't realize that St. Augustine, the Stoic sage St. Augustine, who had this beautiful phrase, whoever sings, prays twice. He was trying to overcome this Arian heresy, and the people it was getting out of control because the heresy was being promoted in song. And so the people were singing it. And Augustine, people don't know, wrote his own song called the ABCs, and he had his own little song for the people because he was trying to counteract the heresy being promoted by song with song of his own. And so song is a power.
And we had the same in Judaism with the Baal Shem Tov.
Yes.
Because there came a point in Judaism, as most religions, where everything was so codified that a normal, regular person could not be a good Jew, because you had to have such a high degree of education and such a high degree of language and so much learning that it was impossible to be a good Jew. And the Baal Shem Tov came along and said, better to know one prayer and sing it with all your heart than to know all the prayers in the world but not have the heart behind it. And it was the Baal Shem who said, dancing glorifies God, singing glorifies God, music glorifies God, and all of that is more important than your years in the yeshiva or in the seminary.
Yeah, absolutely. And we Christians who have taken the Psalter, the Jewish Psalter, as our own prayer, have put it into spoken word primarily, so that we who inherit it all these generations later say the Psalms are like poems or prayers. They really were songs. They were sung. They were danced. You don't say the words, clap your hands, dance you people, sound the trumpet, beat the drum. Any musician would say, beat the drum, and nobody's beating a drum. That's ridiculous. So all the things that were forbidden in prayer, collective prayer, all of this fully engaging the music, engaging the people, it got all wiped out and just got changed.
And it filters down. It filters down into even the language. If you listen to tapes of people talking 30 and 40 years ago, you're not hearing, you know, like, man, every other sentence, you know.
Yeah.
But nowadays, everything is punctuated with, you know, or like. Well, I don't know. But we punctuate it because we need to fill those gaps because, again, if you listen to tapes from 30 or 40 years ago, there is a musicality to the speech and a regionality to the speech that television has just flattened out of us. And we keep trying, I think unconsciously, to bring some musicality back to our spoken word, and yet we don't know how to do it because we don't have the example for our ears to follow anymore. If you listen to MT this morning when you were giving your talk, I was taking notes, and I wasn't taking notes on what you said, I was taking notes on the way you speak. You would say emotion, not emotion, but the emotion of God, up and down, up and down. There was a musicality just to the way you spoke that is very different from the way that we are accustomed to hearing people speak now. And that musicality has a power of its own as well.
Let me.
Oh, we're writing it down, darling.
There you go.
Let me.
No need to recording, huh?
Let me follow that theme for just a moment. Janis, you know what it is to go on tour across this country, and MT, you know what it is to be in foreign countries and perform, and whether you're at home or abroad, now it seems to me at 85, as never before in my life, I guess wartime you'd have to exempt, but and the Vietnam War particularly, but it strikes me that the divisiveness that permeates our own society and afflicts foreign cultures is tearing at us. You see your music occasionally, sometimes often, able to cut through that short-term and long-term, bring people closer together. But would you talk a little bit, each of you, not from the perspective of musicians so much, but from the perspective of human beings, part of that divisiveness inevitably at home and abroad, at home still, abroad so often, tears at this whole idea of equality of women. And there the two of you are professionals, successful by any standard, and observing how people tear at each other over so many issues, but over this one issue that should be bringing us all together. I mean, I run into anti-feminist ideas as much as I run into homophobia these days, and I wonder not whether music can bring us together, but whether politics or spirituality or anything can bring us together. What do you say?
I'd like to step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture, not at the individual animosities or the challenges, let's put it that way, of today, but remind ourselves that our understanding of the universe today is shifting dramatically from how we understood the world that comes out of the Enlightenment period, you know, as made up of composite parts. And there is this pervasive energy, you know, the energy sort that is the cosmic stuff of the cosmos. And that energy is really vibration. And that vibration is at the heart of music, okay? So that in some deep sense, the energy vibrating throughout the universe is vibrating within us with all of our particularities, not the same, but different. So that if we can step back and maybe begin to look at ourselves as somehow we are the collective song of the universe, joining with all that is, the bird song and the wind song and the rain song and all cultures, and we each have different notes. And like last night, there was a moment and you stood back and there went the fiddle, and then she stood back and smiled and there went the banjo, and then came the harmonies, and then it went back and the solo. There was that beautiful sense of it actually, the wave did itself. So that if we can begin to realize that somehow, somewhere, in some way, the song of the universe is being sung to and through us and uniting us all in this choral reality, animals and birds and wind and trees and ourselves, then we have some way to look at the whole picture differently, not just as a world of persons who are trying to get on top and, you know, overcome something. So I do think we need to reach for metaphors, and that's where music, I think, can help us, you know, get a different perspective for going into the future.
This is why you are a kinder and gentler person than I am.
And now a word from my counterpoint here. Yes, the harmony.
I think Yoko Ono, whether you like her or not, said a great thing when she said, "Woman is the nigger of the world." Because in every class, in every culture that I know of, at the bottom of the rung are women. Children, you could argue, are usually at the bottom of the rung and powerless, but boy children get to grow up to be men and take power. And there was a long time where I was uncomfortable with the word feminist because I came out of the 60s and I came out of the 70s, and to me, feminism meant that I had to be a certain way and think a certain thing. And then I went to Berkeley College in Boston, and I had a meeting with the women students there, and I discovered that they were so co-opted and brainwashed that they didn't even know when they were being insulted. And there was a point where one young woman said to me, something happened in my class and I'm not sure if I should be angry or not. And I said, what happened? And she said, well, I have this teacher who's kind of in charge of my next move up. I really want to get into this next class. And they were talking, and he said, well, there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. And someone said, well, how do you tell the difference? And he said, well, that's easy. There's the right way, and then there's the pussy way. And she said, should I have been bothered by that? And for me, that was a complete revelation, and I became a feminist because I looked at her and I said, let's go over this carefully. Number one, he's just said that your female parts are wrong. Let's begin with that. Number two, he has put you in a position where you cannot challenge that because it will cost you the step up. And then I said, what do you think you could have done differently? Are there any men in the class who would have stood with you? And I thought, how pathetic is that she needs a man to stand for her? How shameful is that in America, that you need a man to stand for you, as in Saudi Arabia or other countries where you need a man to help you get anywhere because you're not permitted to drive, to allow you to enter or leave the country. How different are those gradations at the end of the day? How much do they limit us? And in the end, she did take 2 boys from her class, and she went to Human Resources and the proctor, and there was a big stink, as there should have been. But it really opened my eyes to the fact that there is still a world of powerlessness out there, and the more I thought about it, the more I saw the parallels with gay rights, with civil rights, with the rights of women, period, the more I had to examine my own language, as my uncle did when I was 22, and he said, why do you keep calling women chicks? Do you enjoy being compared to an infant? This is my uncle, the feminist, the first feminist I ever met. So I think that as wonderful and as much as I believe in the quantum universe, and by God you know I do, and as much as I really firmly believe that these things do sort themselves out somehow, I also think there is a point where you are never going to be given power. You must always take power. No one is going to hand it to you on a platter. And as women, we need to work with men. We need to embrace men. Men need to understand that we are coming from here and trying to get to here. And we, unfortunately, are in the position of being responsible for educating them about that, because as a man, by and large, they don't see it. They don't have to. I spoke with a friend one day and I said, well, I got off the elevator because 4 or 5 men got on and it was late and I wasn't comfortable. And he was genuinely confused and he said, why would you get off? I would think you'd be more protected with more men there. And I said, there is not a woman in the universe who would agree with that. And he said, what are you talking about? And this was a good guy. This wasn't a bad guy. But I said, you will never know what it's like to walk down the street and deliberately cross over because you see a group of young men and you don't know what they're up to. You just will never know what that's like to be scared all the time on some very bottom low level that there's a rape waiting for you, that there's danger of some sort waiting for you, that someone will overpower you solely because you're female. It's our job, sadly, to educate our sons, to educate our friends, to educate our lovers, our husbands, our parents in that thing. And I think that as lovely as the quantum universe is, until you punch the lights out of some of them, they are just not going to get it.
Well, you know, I didn't hear those words, but I was thinking in terms not dissimilar from that. These last several days, week, 10 days, as I read about sexual assaults in the military. And it's the same old story. that you just recited, but how do you come to grips with it, and how can you change the culture?
And do you think that it's partly biological? Because I cannot imagine a group of women, although I'm sure it has happened, taking a group of men, tying them up, and doing terrible things to them. It's difficult for me to imagine, and maybe that's because we aren't normally in power. Maybe if we were the ones in power all the time, that would happen. I'm not so sure, because I think our bodies betray us in that sense, if that makes any sense at all. I don't know that it's in us biologically to do that.
It doesn't make, I mean, I'm not there, and so I can't say it makes all that much sense to me, but it sounds right.
Thank you. That's my job, to make it sound right. Doesn't matter if it makes any sense
almost,
at all.
I almost wish you'd set it to music. I mean, I think it could make a difference.
Well, that's the issue, I think, as you get older, whatever public service you are in, I think part of the issue becomes, at this point, I represent so many things beyond myself that it's a little worrisome. In fact, it's very worrisome. But I also recognize that I have a voice that reaches further than I ever thought it would reach. And in that sense, for me to write about women becomes a whole different responsibility.
Let me deal with divisiveness. Just one more. Go ahead.
Can I get it? I need to say this. For the record, I am a radical feminist. Thank you. Not to obliterate what I said previously.
No, I love hearing a nun say that.
I want to qualify in this sense. I've spent years doing resources, feminist resources. The first, and as Rosemary Ruther said, the first time my Woman Prayer Woman song put female imagery, ritual, images, metaphors, songs, prayers into official Roman Catholic liturgies, okay? And then all the women of the Bible, I got all discovered, every single woman of the Bible, all of them, and a trilogy of that for pushing this. Defecting in Place, a Gospel According for Women, New Testament for Women, the Chronicles of Noah and her sisters. Did you know that Noah is a female name in your Bible? Yes, daughter of Zelophehad. So the sense was, I am there radically with that, and trying to say that women are created in the image of God, female and male. God created us together. So having said that and going through that, that's the substratum of what informs my quantum energies. It's there, so I agree with you for all of that. Thank you for adding it.
That's one of the reasons we're friends. We're in total agreement.
But we're not, I don't want it to be juxtaposed as that and this, but it's one piece.
Good point.
It is, in fact, a substratum, and then it pops up with specific things that need to be done to push this forward.
But like John just said, and I said this just the other day to my partner, then what do you do? How do you change that entrenched military? How do you change the entrenched you learn from your teachers, you learn from the schools, you learn from your parents, you learn from the churches and synagogues, the order of things. And like you said this morning, we need an order. We need a framework. We all need that. And then we need to keep expanding that framework. But how do you change the military framework? How do you change the genocidal framework? How do you change the culture that says that rape in certain countries is a way to subjugate both men and women? How do you change that? I don't know.
I suppose that was supposed to be my question, but
So
if there have been moments during this last hour when you thought you didn't need me up here on the stage with them, I know exactly what. It's wonderful just to sit here and listen to them interchange and exchange, and
all we need is a laundry machine.
And that's right. But as I said at the outset, we were going to go to you as part of this conversation, and the time has come to do that. Yes, and here's one.
I keyed on what you said during the civil rights issue period, that music plays such a role in change, and when you're talking about the violent military, we need a song.
I think any kind of music is useful. The problem of assigning someone a particular topic to write about in song is that it's very difficult to write an honest song that way. Because most of us, regardless of what we say, don't have a great deal of control over what we write about. We have a control over the context, and we have control over the way we present it, but the actual what is it about, most of us just write what we write, and we're lucky on a good day.
Doesn't it have something to do with the aggressive culture that's part of the military establishment? That there is ingrained in the whole idea of the military this sense of aggressiveness.
Well, then we're into
Sense of
5-year-olds
conquest,
playing
even.
football and universities that spend more money on stadiums than they spend on education. And then we're into a real hornet's nest.
So music is the notes and the space between the notes? I wonder, what do you experience? How do you experience the space between?
I had a friend who was a musician who said to me once that it wasn't the columns, it was the space between the columns that made them great. And it's the same in music. It's the space between the notes that creates the rhythm. It's the space between the notes that creates the breathing space. It's the same in the liturgy. I loved the Latin Mass. Oh my gosh. You know, there was a period where I wanted so badly to be Catholic so that I could go and see that every week and listen to it. The space.
You wouldn't want to go there thinking, think twice.
But if you think about it,
Been there,
it's
done
like
that.
life.
Been there,
I
done
mean,
that, got the t-shirt.
how much do you have to work with in your day-to-day life? You have the same things that we as performers work with. You have space and you have time. And that's really all you've got to work with most days. So it's the space between your words. It's the space between your children. It's the space between your jobs. It's the time that you take with things. When I hear music in my head, I hear rhythms, but the rhythm is created from the space, not from the it. And that goes back to quantum physics also. Because if not for that space between particles, there'd be no way for them to spin. And if they can't spin, they can't connect and bounce off each other and create the astonishing fact that my leg is made of the same things as this chair. They're just put together differently. That's space. It's really cool.
Well said.
There's one
Thank
here,
you. Thank you.
and then you. Go ahead.
Okay, this is for both of you. Do you think we'll have a female president in 2016?
Why not? Let's get working, huh? Get mobilized. Learn something from the strategies that were successful in this election and the previous one. Whoever thought we'd have an African American president?
Not in my lifetime.
Not in my lifetime. Well, we had one, and now let's go for the female. I think we got a really, really good chance of it. Really. Female Pope, not so good. President, yes.
Got a couple over there too, John.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry, it's a comment. I apologize up front. But I just wanted to comment on this notion of the space in between. And that is something that resonates very deeply with me, musically, spiritually, and also as an artist. There's a wonderful Kabbalistic notion of the white fire between the black fire, and it's the space in between the words of the Torah, and that is where God lives. So that can be metaphorical for a lot of things. So in terms of making music, I think, and my father's a musician, and my mom's over here going, yes, that's his favorite topic. I want to hear a little bit more about this, the space of stillness, the space of, that's where creativity is born and where it comes from. And I'd love to hear just a little bit more from you about that.
I think it's dangerous to say that creativity comes from stillness, because it's, you say this better than I do, but it's imposing words that a kid in the ghetto or in New York City, anywhere, living among sirens and noise all the time, is never going to have the experience of the stillness that I had as a kid in an open field. They're going to have to find a stillness within, and it worries me when people think that creativity has to come from that place, because it's not a stillness to me, it's just a deep and abiding sense of oneness, if that isn't too pretentious.
I think you're saying the same thing but differently.
Right,
You're,
right.
you're defining stillness differently, but you're still agreeing to stillness.
The terrible thing about being a writer is that words are just so
Yeah.
precise. It's irritating to my partner as well.
Over here? Yes.
I do have a question. I'm curious, do you know what happened to that Berkeley student?
As far as I know, she graduated. But that's as far as I know.
Anything that happened to the instructor?
I have no idea, but I do know that after I spent 10 days there, they did form several women's groups, and they do have a different human resources attitude. And I was told recently by one of the teachers that a lot of things changed. I was not the agent of the change, I was a conduit for the change. And I honestly don't think that, and I have a lot of respect for Roger Brown, the president of Berkeley. I honestly, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, I honestly don't think he realized. Because it's not happening to him or in his framework. I honestly don't think that he realized the difficulties female musicians there faced as females. Because you have to be so good as a female musician, you have to be so much better. Because you don't get invited to be in the bands, so you never learn to work your equipment. You don't get asked to sit in with people, so you never learn how to play in an ensemble. What was extraordinary about last night was that, through no fault of my own, because I wasn't even thinking were they women or men, we had 5 women musicians on stage, players and singers, joining together, all of whom were masters of their crafts. And I would bet that out of the 5 of us, not one of us was ever invited to join a boys' band when we were teenagers. Not one of us was, I mean, I begged bands, and they would always say, God, she plays great for a girl. Thank you very much. I just want to play great. So it's a much harder road to hoe. And that's what I mean when I say it's got to start early. It's got to start with the world of now. For the first time, when I started out, not to run on, but when I started out, there were no women engineers, there were no women lighting designers, there were no women tour managers, there were no women drummers, percussionists. Women played violin. That's what women did in music, or they played guitar, but not on their records. So when I go on tour now and I see women lighting directors and I see women production managers, that's a quantum leap forward for me. And when I see the men that they work with accustomed to that and not thinking anything about it, that's a quantum leap for me. That gives me hope because it has all changed. It needs to continue changing.
Yes.
This is a quick comment followed by a question. I worked for a short time for a nonprofit here in Nashville that dealt with rape and sexual abuse, and there are women that abuse people sexually, a much lesser percentage than men, it's true, but I just kind of want to put that out there. Men are not the only violent and abusive gender, but it is predominantly men, and I have my own theories on that, I won't get into it, but my question is, can you think of some tangible, concrete examples as women? I know neither of you are mothers, and I'm not either. But in the role as mothers, aunts, teachers, mentors, what can we do to start changing the way the men we love behave? Because what I see in my everyday life is women that love men sort of tacitly condoning maybe not violent behavior, but really inappropriate, sexually inappropriate, misogynistic behavior. And it's very upsetting to me. So how can we turn that around?
Sitting here listening to that, wondering what Dolores is going to say to me on the way home.
Well, and you're dealing with so many areas there because you're dealing with the cycle of abuse and the perpetuation of abuse. And having been in a pretty abusive relationship myself, you're also dealing with the brainwashing and what happens to you as the slow rate of attrition as you are slowly beaten down. You're dealing with all of those. That's just such a huge, I wouldn't even know where to begin.
Let me clarify. I'm talking about before it even gets to abuse. I'm talking about the the mother or the sister that thinks it's cool that her 17-year-old son has slept with, 7 of his classmates, and that's okay in high school. But if a girl does it,
Is it
she's
that
a
bad?
big old SLUT. I'm talking about that sort of thing. How do we change that? That's just one example. That may not be abusive, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but it's a behavior that, if nothing else, is certainly still a big double standard in today's society. And it's almost like it's cool if the guy does it.
Well, I read a statistic once that the average teenage boy thinks of sex every 70 seconds. And I said to my partner, so why am I expecting them to pay attention to anything? In all seriousness, I think there's a point where the biology is just different. And that's not to say that that condones it, or that it excuses it, or that it is even an explanation, but it is very different. I don't know, except that peer pressure certainly plays a large part in that behavior. I mean, one of the reasons at 17 my song was such a success was because it said to the people who had this enormous peer pressure on them, you're okay, because eventually, you will be a swan. Eventually, just hang in there, and you will be a swan. So it gave a way to look at the peer pressure and say, someday this will all not matter, or this will all change. But how you change it, I think it has to come from the men. I think a lot of it has to come from men like John, who's an equal partner with his wife. I think it has to come realistically. Men can talk to men in a way women cannot talk to men, and vice versa.
Just remember, I'm supposed to be an equal partner.
There you go.
You had a question right there.
This is sort of to take her question into the more universal or macro. MT, today you gave us the imagery of the agents of change, and you said instead of agents of change where we're trying to control and fix everything, impose our will upon the universe, that we step back and we realize we are channels of love, channels of the goodness. So how do we maneuver that subtlety of wanting to be proactive and impose change upon the world and upon society, and yet also be reactive and be loving and be that channel to where we just stand?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really hard challenge in trying to be both of those things.
To answer, or try to answer that, I'd like to segue away from your question. Succinctly put, this is not my area of expertise, obviously. So I wanted to look like not to look like I avoided it totally, because I can't make a direct connection. But I do want to say this, that the world in which we live is dominated by the reality of power over. And the power over is relegated primarily or most often to, in a kind of patriarchal, hierarchical ranked area where the male of the species dominates, okay? And the systems, there's a corporate power, so there's a collective power, and by the time it's almost so pervasive, so insidious, and now more and more invisibly there, and you feel the effects of it, but you can't quite trace back to exactly what it is, so you can begin to disentangle it, okay? So it is a matrix, a framework that comes out of a view of the universe, the physical world in which we live, that is fast growing out of date. That, God's in his heaven and all's right with the world, and everything is, if you want to fix something, you just take it apart and put it back together and rebuild it, or it's all constructed. What we were talking about this morning was this emerging sense and understanding of the world, the physical world in which we live, whereby, in a kind of deep, organic way, the universe and its energy has the capacity and the power, everything that exists, to right itself and fix itself from within. You see, it's something that comes from within, and there's a disturbance and things are chaotic and a mess, but somehow it'll work its way out. Now that sounds very Pollyanna in terms of what you're saying. I'm talking philosophically and in a larger sense here, because we've got to begin to think differently. We're living in a universe that is being dominated by a whole different understanding of connectedness and consciousness and oneness, even as we as individual nations and cultures and whatever are trying to hold on to our little piece of whatever the pie was. We forgot even what it was, but we don't want to let it go. Right. And so as we try to rearrange the pieces on the chessboard of the planet, the game has changed. And the next generation has the tools to get us out of this mess, because they start at a different place. They start at a sense of course, we can be instantaneously connected with anybody on the planet, and anything I need to know, I can Google and get the answer in 5 seconds. So what's the big deal? You know, let me read my books and hear my music, we'll fix it or something. That sense of we've got to begin, we who come out of a faith basis and know that there's qualitatively something more out there, we've got to get in tune with that in the world in which we live before we can begin to find how we can be not agents of change as if we were the ones who can do it or fix it, but rather assist. I'd like to use the word midwives. That we are midwives of bringing to birth a new way of being in the world, in a planet that is no longer identified by or defined by separatenesses. The separateness is created by religious systems, social systems, political systems, and yes, gender, but rather a sense of we are one planet in a big universe with all kinds of diversity. And diversity, God, or the sacred, loves diversity because everything is different. And we're always trying to create sameness. And that sameness, by the way, is what we think is the right way to be. And so we have to begin living into a global reality that's right at hand. It's no longer over there. It's right here in the midst of us. And some of you are married to the diversity and are bearing diverse children. And so it's right there in your parlors and your living
I think we
rooms.
probably have time for one more question. I've been waiting for you so long. I've been waiting to hear from you for so long. Welcome to my world.
I'm going to try to ask a question. I do believe that music is a natural part of the cosmos. It's historically been considered an art. And if you wanted to study it formally, you'd study it in a liberal arts setting as opposed to a science setting. So it's been considered an art as opposed to a science. But recently, there seems to be evidence that music can actually affect a person's health, wellness, well-being. Do you believe that? And how do you see that changing or affecting the medical sciences or even the music sciences going forward? Is there an opportunity to bring those together?
And one small correction. It's only since just after the Renaissance that the arts and the sciences became separated. Up until then, they were considered the same disciplines.
I'd say historically, I went to school in the 60s.
Okay, no, but seriously, this is something that most of us don't think about. Even more recently, NARAS, who are the Grammy people, it's the National Association of Recording Arts and Sciences, because the arts and the sciences are so closely intertwined, and most scientists, like Einstein, play something, and most artists are fascinated by science. So there's a lot of intermarriage there and a lot of intermingling there. And I'm going to let you take the rest of it.
Oh, I think you better keep going.
Oh, God.
You're on a roll. There's that, you're right on target. I can't give any specifics because I haven't gotten more deeply into the implications of what you're saying, which is true. Okay, and how can we actually utilize that more effectively? But I do know if we look back, phrases such as the music of the spheres and the harmony of the universe, and talking about the playing the plectrum, you know, playing the music of the stars, and that was part of the mystics' language, so to speak. They're metaphors. And if you look at the heart of the energy that underlies quantum reality, it's the same energy. It's the vibrations of music is there. Therefore, there's a lot of studies being done, which I haven't explored in depth, but it's out there. And I think we need to look into that because it's a growing edge, and I think it will help us.
And it was part of Western culture, and it's been written out because the Greeks, for instance, had, I believe,
Yes.
a 24-tone scale as opposed to a 12-tone, which is what we have, which means that they had twice as many notes in an octave as we have. And if you go back to Plato and several of the Greek philosophers, they write about this one particular note makes you feel sad. This one particular note makes you feel not even happy, but gradations of that, elated as opposed to just joyful. You know, they considered that each note had its own value. Bob Dylan said, why are all the great love songs in D? You know, why are most of the blues songs in E or in B flat? Why is B flat a great jazz key? There's something that each vibration of sound does to the body that we've just only begun to recognize and tap as we work our way through all the things that have been covered up and lost in our own history. Can I just...
Yes, you can.
Thank you. I love science fiction. I love science fiction in part because when science fiction authors talk about diversity and talk about the clashes between cultures, we are all in agreement that if aliens landed tomorrow, there would be no issue of you're a man, I'm a woman. There would be no issue of you're a black or you're a white. There would be we are human, they are not. And that's the dividing line. And it's interesting to me that if you look at a film like Aliens with Sigourney Weaver or the Terminator series, the men and women are working together against a common enemy. Maybe that's what it takes to unite us. I don't know. But in all seriousness, if there's a unifying factor in the world, it's that we are human. All of us, whether we're men, whether we're women, whether we're black or white or yellow or orange or whatever, we are human beings in this world as opposed to being fish or elephants. Whatever you think of elephants, they are not human. And in that sense, I think as a mob, we're easy to control through ignorance and through fear. But when you come down to the bottom of it, we are this wonderfully diverse group of human beings. And that's the amazing part of it, that there could be such diversity among us, that nobody looks the same, that nobody sounds the same, that nobody thinks the same, that no writer is ever going to write the same song that you would write or say the same thing that you would say. And that gives me hope. That gives me hope because there is more in common than there is not in common. That's what I wanted to say.
Let me, that's wonderful. Let me close with just a thought of my own. I've listened to the last half hour and pondered in my own mind, what will bring about change? And as I look back at the history of this country, and I'll be brief with this, it strikes me that we had two social movements in the 20th century that dramatically altered our culture and our way of life. And of course, the Civil Rights Movement was one, and it was successful because it relied, and this is going to sound like a commercial to the founder of the First Amendment Center to say, for the founder of the First Amendment Center to say, but the Civil Rights Movement, if you just think about it, was grounded in the freedoms assured in the First Amendment. Begins in the black church religious liberty. Speech, they speak from the pulpit, from the platform, from the street corner. Congress was flooded with petitions. And peaceful protest Nonviolent protest made the difference. The other social protest came about because of women. Just go back to election a few years before I was born. I look around this room, and at most, a half dozen of us would have been able to vote because of that gender difference. And there was something called the National American Women's Suffrage Association.
Right.
And it was headed by dedicated leaders. Susan Anthony and had her leadership had passed. And it was a non-militant movement, if you look at the history of it. It was go along, get along. I mean, I'm not criticizing the women who led it. I wasn't part of it. I wasn't born. But if you look at that history, come World War I, they backed away. They said, we're going to leave President Woodrow Wilson alone. He's got enough troubles without having to hear from us. No protest on Congress. One splinter group of the women's movement, headed by a woman named Alice Paul, said, we're not going with you. She formed something called the National Women's Party, and they picketed and they protested. They gave Wilson hell every week right there at the White House. And they gave Congress, I mean, they would go into Congress and have their banners and drop them over the balcony and be arrested. Every member of Alice Paul's organization went to jail. They started hunger strikes. Alice herself was fed to keep her alive by putting tubes into her nostrils and pumping milk and eggs into her system. They protested peacefully. They petitioned extensively. They spoke from every single place, as unseemly as it was for women to speak. And a free press covered the abuse that was heaped on them as the free press covered the abuse heaped upon civil rights demonstrators a generation later. John Lewis said for his movement, the media to the movement was wings to the bird. And I look back on it and read those clips from 17, 18, 19, and you'll find that the abuse that was heaped upon the members of that women's party was well covered, and as the later movement covered by the media shocked the conscience of the country, so did the abuse delivered to Alice Paul and her followers. And I'm wondering if, once again, it's not going to require women, but as you said, Janis, women and men together, relying on those same freedoms of protest to bring this country to a realization that we are, after all, as you both have said so eloquently, we are part of the same humanity. And that the gender differences, yes, make a difference, but must make no ultimate difference in terms of our equality. I didn't plan to preach a sermon tonight, but
That was well
that's
said.
the
That
end
was
of it.
well
You all
said,
say
John.
amen, and we'll go home.
Well said.
While you're applauding, I just want to ask you not to stop. Have we not been lucky tonight to have these two stars here with us?
This program has been made possible by the Carpenter Program in Religion, Gender, and Sexuality at Vanderbilt University. This has been a production of the Scarlett Bennett Center and Nashville Public Television.